Darius Vane had been staring at the same ceiling panel for 3 hours and 42 minutes. Not that anyone was counting, except for the 17 monitoring devices currently trained on his body, mind, and various biological processes. The panel was an odd, iridescent material that seemed to shift between deep purple and midnight blue depending on how the light from the recessed fixtures hit it. It reminded him of spilled oil on asphalt after a rainstorm. A small comfort in an otherwise sterile environment. Subject appears to be in a state of unusual calm, a voice chirped from somewhere beyond the transparent barrier surrounding his quarters. Respiration and heart rate are consistent with meditation or light sleep, despite being fully conscious. Darius didn't bother looking over. He'd seen enough of his captors, or research hosts as they preferred to be called, in the past 6 weeks to last several lifetimes. The Keld were tall, thin beings with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished obsidian reflecting a galaxy of tiny stars. Beautiful, in their way, if you could get past the way they treated sentient beings as fascinating lab specimens. Of course I'm calm, Darius muttered to the ceiling. What else is there to do in cosmic jail? Start a riot? There's literally just me and whatever the hell that thing is next door. The thing next door was some sort of gelatinous mass with 14 eyes that spent most of its time vibrating against the wall between their cells. Darius had nicknamed it Jello Shot. A sharp tapping sound drew his attention. Lead researcher Nixa stood at the barrier, all 4 of her arms clutching various instruments. Unlike her colleagues, she didn't wear the standard silvery research uniform. Hers was a deep crimson that seemed designed specifically to set her apart. A boss move, Darius had to admit. We're ready for today's assessment, Human Vane, she announced, her voice having that peculiar harmonic quality all Keld speech possessed, like 2 people talking in perfect unison but slightly out of sync. Darius swung his legs over the side of the bed and stretched dramatically. Let me guess. Another round of let's see how the human responds to increasingly bizarre stimuli. Yesterday was electric shocks. Day before was extreme temperature changes. What's on the menu today? Tickle torture. Because I should warn you, I'm exceptionally ticklish and have been known to accidentally kick people when. Fear response analysis, Nixa interrupted. Her upper right hand made a fluid gesture that seemed to be the Keld equivalent of dismissiveness. Your species has proven challenging to categorize. Darius stood up and walked to the barrier, hands in the pockets of the gray jumpsuit they'd provided him. Is that your way of saying you don't understand humans at all? For the first time, he noticed something different about the research chamber beyond his cell. A new apparatus had been installed. A sleek device attached to the ventilation system. Several Keld technicians hovered around it, making adjustments with their multiple limbs moving in hypnotic coordination. We understand enough, Nixa replied. For instance, we know that all sentient species have evolved with fear as a survival mechanism. The Vrokith, she gestured toward Jello Shot's enclosure, have 15 distinct fear responses, each tied to specific environmental threats from their home world. How fascinating for them, Darius said flatly. And what exactly do you hope to learn from scaring me? Nixa's head tilted in what Darius had come to recognize as their expression of scientific curiosity. Every species we've studied has revealed its true nature when confronted with fear. The Zebradrax shut down completely. The Hollandi become hyper-aggressive. The Makai transform physically. Fear strips away pretense and social construction, revealing core adaptations. And humans? That's what we intend to discover. Darius felt a flicker of genuine concern for the first time since his abduction. He'd handled the physical tests well enough, humans were nothing if not adaptable, but psychological warfare was another matter entirely. And if I refused to participate? Nixa made a sound that might have been a laugh. Participation is not optional, Human Vane. But your concerns are noted. She turned to her colleagues and made a series of rapid gestures. The technicians responded by activating the new apparatus, which began to emit a soft, pulsing glow. Darius backed away from the barrier. Hey, wait a minute. The compound we're introducing is tailored specifically for human neurochemistry, Nixa explained as a thin mist began to seep into his enclosure through the ventilation system. We synthesized it based on our analysis of your brain structure and nervous system. It targets the amygdala and related structures to stimulate your most primal fears. The mist was colorless but carried a faint electrical scent, like the air before a thunderstorm. Darius held his breath as long as he could, but eventually his lungs began to burn. He gasped involuntarily, drawing the substance deep into his body. The effect was immediate. His pupils dilated. His heart rate spiked. His skin flushed with adrenaline. But instead of the panic attack the Keld scientists were clearly expecting, Darius simply closed his eyes and took another deep breath. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Nixa and smiled. "Is that all you've got?" he asked quietly. Nixa consulted one of her instruments, then looked back at Darius with what seemed like confusion. "The compound concentration is at maximum. You should be experiencing extreme terror." Darius walked back to his bed and sat down. "Ha! Weird." The research team erupted into a flurry of activity, checking equipment and recalibrating sensors. Nixa approached the barrier again, all four arms now empty, her posture rigid with scientific indignation. "Explain," she demanded. Darius shrugged. "Maybe your formula isn't as good as you thought." "Impossible. It was perfect." "Well, it doesn't work on me. It should work on any human." Darius leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Want to know what it smells like to me?" Nixa's starry skin seemed to shimmer with intensity. "What?" "Home," Darius said simply. "It smells like home." The research chamber fell silent. Even the constant background hum of machinery seemed to pause momentarily. Nixa stared at him with an expression he couldn't read, something between scientific fascination and existential horror. "That is not possible," she finally said, though her harmonious voice had lost some of its confidence. "And yet," Darius replied, gesturing to himself, "here I am. Completely unterrified." That wasn't entirely true. He could feel the chemical working through his system, the elevated heart rate, the heightened awareness, the slight tremor in his hands. But these sensations were so familiar, so deeply woven into the fabric of his daily existence back on Earth, that they barely registered as unusual. Anxiety wasn't an emergency for him, it was a roommate. Nixa turned abruptly and conferred with her team in hushed tones. Darius caught fragments of their conversation, words like anomaly, and unprecedented, and something that sounded like reconfigure. When Nixa returned to the barrier, her demeanor had changed. The scientific detachment had been replaced by something closer to personal fascination. "We will need to conduct further tests," she announced. Darius laid back on his bed and resumed staring at the ceiling panel. "Of course you will. You don't seem concerned by this prospect." "Should I be?" "Most subjects find our fear analysis to be the most uncomfortable of our procedures." Darius laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed in the enclosed space. "That's because most species run from fear. Humans. We've turned it into an entertainment industry. We pay good money to be scared." Nixa's head tilted again. "Explain." "Horror movies. Roller coasters. Haunted houses. Extreme sports. Hell, have you seen our news cycle? Fear isn't just something we experience, it's something we cultivate." For the first time since his capture, Darius saw something new in his captor's expression, not just scientific curiosity, but genuine uncertainty. "Perhaps," Nixa said slowly, "we have been underestimating your species." "Everyone does," Darius replied, closing his eyes as the fear gas continued to circulate through his cell, its effects no more disruptive than the background anxiety he'd lived with for most of his adult life. "It's kind of our superpower." 3 days after the failed fear gas experiment, Darius found himself in a new environment. Instead of his transparent cell, He sat in what appeared to be the Keld equivalent of a conference room, a circular chamber with a low, curved table and strange, ergonomic seating designed for beings with 4 arms and a different center of gravity. He'd been given actual clothes instead of the standard jumpsuit, black pants and a simple gray tunic that was surprisingly comfortable. Across from him sat Nixa, flanked by 2 other researchers he recognized but couldn't name. They'd been observing him silently for almost 15 minutes, their obsidian skin reflecting the soft ambient light. "Is this a staring contest?" Darius finally asked. "Because I should warn you, I once went undefeated for an entire summer at camp." Nixa's upper right hand made a subtle gesture, and a holographic display appeared above the table. It showed Darius's neural patterns during the fear gas exposure, compared with those of other test subjects. "Your brain activity was unprecedented," she said. "The compound activated your amygdala and triggered a cascade of stress hormones, but your frontal cortex immediately engaged in a counterbalance pattern we've never observed before." "Humans call it being used to it," Darius replied. "Explain." Darius leaned back, considering how to describe something so fundamental to human existence. "Look, where I'm from, Earth, obviously, fear isn't just an occasional survival response. It's ambient. Constant. A low-grade fever that never quite breaks." "You live in perpetual danger?" one of the other researchers asked, clearly fascinated. "Not exactly." Darius ran a hand through his dark hair, searching for the right words. "We've just optimized our society for it. Our news is 90% fear-based. Our economy runs on insecurity. Our politics thrive on it. Most humans wake up afraid and go to sleep afraid, just of different things at different times." Nixa's head tilted in that now familiar expression of curiosity. "And this is normal for your species?" "As normal as breathing." The memory came unbidden, his tiny apartment in Chicago, television blaring warnings about economic collapse, phone buzzing with alerts about new health scares, social media feeding him carefully curated streams of outrage and anxiety. The crushing student debt, the impossible housing market, the precarious gig work that barely covered essentials. The climate reports growing more dire by the day. And underneath it all, that persistent hum of dread that had become so familiar he only noticed it when it occasionally, briefly, subsided. "What you pumped into my cell was just Tuesday for me," Darius continued. "We've evolved, or devolved, depending on how you look at it, to function with fear as our background radiation." The researchers exchanged glances, communicating in that silent way they had. "But this should be debilitating," Nixa argued. "Chronic fear response typically leads to system breakdown in all species we've studied. Cognitive impairment. Physical deterioration. Eventual shutdown." Darius smiled thinly. "That's where you're wrong. Humans don't shut down. We adapt. We joke about it. We turn it into art. We weaponize it. When fear becomes the water you swim in, you either drown or grow gills." "You've grown gills," Nixa said, not as a question but as a realization. "Metaphorically speaking, yes." "And what happens when new fears arise?" Darius laughed. "We incorporate them into the routine. It's like weight training, what terrified our grandparents is just a warm-up for us." The holographic display shifted to show comparative data between Darius and the other specimens. The differences were stark. While other species showed clear patterns of avoidance or aggression when confronted with fear stimuli, Darius's readings showed something else entirely, a complex neurological dance between fear recognition and adaptation. "We have a theory," Nixa said after a long pause. "Your species has essentially domesticated fear. You've made it a companion rather than an enemy. That's one way to put it." The chamber suddenly filled with a soft, pulsing alarm. The researchers straightened, all 4 arms tensing simultaneously. "What's happening?" Darius asked. Nixa touched a control panel embedded in the table. "Disruption in the primary containment system. Several specimens have escaped." The alarm grew louder, and the quality of light in the chamber shifted to a deep crimson. Through the doorway, Darius could hear the sounds of chaos, metallic crashes, strange vocalizations that might have been alien screams, the hurried movements of Keld personnel. Including the Vrokith, one of the other researchers added, voice dropping to a lower harmonic. Containment breach in Sector 7. Jello shots on the loose. Darius couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride for his gelatinous neighbor. This is not amusing, human Vane, Nixa snapped. The Vrokith is a predatory organism. When threatened, it becomes highly aggressive and secretes a neurotoxin that. A violent impact shook the entire room, cutting her off mid-sentence. Something heavy had struck the outer corridor wall. We need to evacuate to the security bunker, one of the researchers urged, already moving toward a concealed door at the back of the chamber. Nixa hesitated, looking at Darius. The human. Bring him, the other researcher said. We cannot risk losing this specimen. Always nice to be valued, Darius muttered as they ushered him through the hidden door and into a narrow corridor beyond. They moved quickly through a series of increasingly restricted areas, passing panicked Keld scientists along the way. Several were injured, their starfield skin dull and clouded in patches. The alarm continued its relentless pulse, now accompanied by automated announcements in the melodic Keld language. What exactly is the plan here? Darius asked as they arrived at a heavy security door. Lock ourselves in and hope whatever's out there loses interest. The containment system will be restored, Nixa assured him, though her harmonious voice carried an edge of uncertainty. It's simply a matter of. The lights went out completely. In the sudden darkness, the only illumination came from the faint star-like patterns in the Keld skin, not nearly enough to see by. Emergency power should activate, one of the researchers said. But nothing happened. The darkness remained absolute, broken only by the dim, bioluminescent glow of the Keld themselves. Okay, this is bad, Darius stated the obvious. What eats the electrical system in an advanced alien research vessel? A low, viscous sound came from somewhere down the corridor they just traversed, a wet, sliding noise followed by what might have been the sizzle of acid on metal. The Vrokith is drawn to electrical fields, Nixa explained quietly. It may have damaged the power distribution nodes. Great. So we're trapped in the dark with a pissed-off toxic jellyfish. Darius felt his heart rate increasing, adrenaline flooding his system, the same physiological response the fear gas had triggered, but more intense now. And yet, strangely familiar. Comfortable, even. You are afraid now, Nixa observed, apparently able to detect his biological responses even in the darkness. Of course I am. I'm not an idiot. Darius took a deep breath. But here's the thing about humans and fear, we've learned to use it. He could feel it happening, the familiar process of fear transforming into heightened awareness, into focus, into energy waiting to be directed. His pupils dilated maximally in the darkness. His hearing sharpened. Time seemed to slow down. What is your plan? Nixa asked. First, we need light. Darius reached into his pocket and pulled out the small metallic stylus they'd given him to record his thoughts during captivity. He'd noticed it had a mild electrical charge. Your jellyfish friend is attracted to electrical fields, right? Let's give it something to chase. He quickly disassembled the stylus, exposing its power cell. Your skin, can you dim it? He asked the Keld. Their luminescent patterns faded until they were nearly invisible in the darkness. Perfect. Now, when I throw this, we move in the opposite direction, Darius instructed. The emergency systems, are they on a separate grid? Yes, Nixa confirmed. But the manual activation is in the central laboratory. Then that's where we're going. Darius twisted the power cell until it began to emit a high-pitched whine, then hurled it as far as he could down the corridor. The small light arced through the darkness before clattering against the distant floor. Almost immediately, the wet, sliding sound changed direction, moving toward the improvised lure. Move, Darius whispered, guiding the Keld researchers in the opposite direction. They navigated through the darkened vessel by memory and touch, using Darius's improvised distractions whenever they heard the Vrokith drawing near. Twice they encountered other escaped specimens, once a floating gas creature that Nixa dispersed with a precise movement of her lower arms, and once something that scuttled across the ceiling on dozens of tiny legs. "You seem unusually capable in crisis," Nixa observed as they paused at a junction. "This is what fear is for," Darius replied. "It's not supposed to paralyze you. It's supposed to make you hyper-aware, hyper-focused. Humans have just forgotten that part sometimes." They reached the central laboratory to find it in disarray, equipment scattered, samples destroyed, and the emergency systems panel damaged but still functional. Darius set to work bypassing the damaged sections while Nixa and her colleagues secured the doors. "Why are you helping us?" Nixa asked suddenly. "We abducted you. Experimented on you." Darius didn't look up from his work. "Because that's another thing about humans. We're really, really bad at doing what makes logical sense when there's an emergency. We run into burning buildings. We dive into freezing water. We put ourselves between predators and strangers. That is not rational survival behavior." "No," Darius agreed. "But it might be why we've survived as long as we have." The panel finally lit up under his hands. Emergency power flooded back into the vessel, lights flickering on, security systems reactivating. In the restored illumination, he could see the research chamber beyond, and the Vrokith oozing through a ventilation duct in the ceiling, its 14 eyes all swiveling toward them. "Containment field activate, now!" Darius shouted. Nixa's 4 arms moved in perfect coordination across the control array. A shimmering energy barrier sprang up around the Vrokith, which writhed in obvious distress before settling into the sullen pulsation Darius recognized from their time as neighbors. "Systems restoring," one of the other researchers announced. "Security drones deploying to recapture the remaining specimens." Darius slumped against the wall, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb. He felt the familiar post-fear exhaustion setting in, the crash after the chemical high. Nixa approached him, her obsidian skin now fully illuminated again with its galaxy of tiny lights. "You used your fear," she said simply. "That's what it's for." "Our initial hypothesis was incorrect," she admitted. "We believed fear was a universal weakness to be exploited. A way to understand and potentially control other species. And now? Now I understand that for humans, it is something else entirely. Not a weakness, but a tool. Perhaps even a strength." She paused. "A strength we significantly underestimated." 3 days later, Darius stood in a launch bay, watching as Keld technicians prepared a small vessel. His original clothes had been returned to him, cleaned and repaired. Nixa stood beside him, her crimson researcher's garb replaced by what appeared to be a formal diplomatic uniform of deep blue. "The High Council has reviewed my findings," she said. "Your return to Earth has been approved, along with an official proposal for proper diplomatic relations between our species. No more kidnapping test subjects?" Darius asked with a raised eyebrow. "We have determined that approach to be counterproductive," Nixa admitted. "Especially with humans." Darius smiled. "Smart decision. There is one more thing." Nixa extended her lower right hand, offering a small metallic device. "Our analysis of your neurological patterns has led to a prototype. It dampens the chronic fear response without reducing cognitive function or alertness." Darius looked at the device but didn't take it. "A fear inhibitor? It would allow your species to experience life without the constant background anxiety you described." Darius considered this for a moment, then gently closed Nixa's hand around the device. "Keep it. Or destroy it. That background hum of fear, it's not just our burden. It's also our edge." "I don't understand." "Fear keeps us moving forward," Darius explained. "It's the thing that makes us look at a dying planet and decide to build spaceships instead of monuments. It's the voice that whispers, what if, and, not good enough, and, keep going. Take that away, and you might just take away what makes us human. Nix's head tilted in that now familiar gesture of curiosity. You choose to live with fear. We've made friends with it, Darius corrected her. It's not always a healthy friendship, but it's ours. As he boarded the vessel that would return him to Earth, Darius thought about the fear gas that had started this whole strange journey, how it had smelled like home to him because, in many ways, fear was home for humanity. Not a place of comfort, perhaps, but a familiar country whose borders they had learned to navigate, whose language they had learned to speak, whose harsh landscapes had shaped them into what they were. And what they might yet become.